Let's continue right now with the first panel. I mean, we heard the introduction, we had a glimpse to the thinking of our president on these issues. He was actually very modest. He started to talk about the role of education, and but he didn't really mention that he started kind of it when he was a foreign minister in '96. He pushed for the Tiger Leap project, which connected all the schools in Estonia. And actually, there is a direct connection to Georgia in this case, because in 2004, when Georgia had the Rose Revolution, after that, we were invited to advise on what to do in Georgia, and actually Georgia overtook this, our Tiger Leap project basically, renamed it so as Irmis Noctomis, which is a deer leap, but basically doing functionally the same things. Now, but President ended up with praising the ID card and then the X-Road. And this brought us directly into the topic of our panel, which is about the centralized, decentralized e-governance policymaking. So which way to go? And it is something that I have seen policymakers grappling for the last decade. I think you too, at least, because Dejan has been in the business a very long time. And he will be the first speaker in the panel. But before I give the word to him, I will like to make a couple of more observations. I think one of those is that, as a central one maybe, is that it isn't, we have come to realize that while technology is the main ingredient in all of this changing, with technology alone, we can't get too far. We have to have the environment set up, the processes surrounding where technology is used set up correctly as well. And that seems to be the tricky part. As long as we delegate this e-governance building into the some kind of a little IT department, which is in a cellar behind the elevator shaft, we won't really get the kind of transformational power out of the technology that we want to. But how do we do it? We have here a panel of really diverse backgrounds. In a sense, we have representatives of business, representatives of international organizations, representatives of government. Jointly, I believe you have experience from more than, well, 20 countries, I presume, at least. So some of your insights, maybe. So we'll start with a little introductory statements, but then we'll go on with debates. Let's see what are the thorny issues. I don't want to set or define them too much myself. I hope you will help me in a short while, but first let's listen. Dejan, you said that your slide is too technical, but after the president's speech, I think it's exactly, well, yes, his was, yes, kind of.
Well, it's always a challenge to deliver the speech after President Silvas, because whenever I have the opportunity to listen to him, I frantically write down his comments and his remarks in order to comment. I will just say, I have to say, my first computer was not PDP-8, it was PDP-11, and it did have 16K of memory, which makes me a little bit younger than Mr. Ilves. But my first personal computer was Sinclair ZX Spectrum 48K that my parents bought for me for 1,000 German marks back in 1983. And this is when I started learning programming, not knowing that I would, as you can see, end up with this panel with distinguished guests here next to me on the topic of centralized versus decentralized e-government, or e-governance, actually. as said at the beginning, I've been in this business for about 22 years. I had the pleasure to work with many countries in the world on their e-government and e-governance implementation. The first one being the western provinces of Canada, British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and the others, but recently, over the last 12 years, in countries in Central and East Europe. So my name is Dejan Cvetkovic. I'm a Chief Technology Officer for Microsoft in CE, and I'm very glad to give some opening remarks about centralized versus decentralized e-governance. First, I'll start with the pros and cons of each and every approach. Centralized e-governance means being more cost-effective, being under the strong management of the development and implementation, being focused on integrated solutions, and being focused on standardized processes. And I have to say that no matter how loosely coupled or innovated or decentralized the information technology is, there is a requirement for the certain portion of e-governance to be centralized no matter what. In my company, we say that there needs to be a certain level of centralization, and we call it the bare critical minimum. And I'll just give you several examples. Bare critical minimum means the horizontal scenarios that are the foundation for the successful e-governance. The first one, the first example that I would like to give is interoperability. You know, Estonia is lucky. You have a policy in Estonia that is called no legacy after 13 years, right? So that's amazing in the public sector environment, because in the countries of Central and East Europe where I work, they have mainframes from 1950s, right? So they have every single piece of technology starting from 50s, both on the hardware and software side, right? It's impossible to integrate those without an interoperability policy. That needs to be centralized. The second one is digital identity. As President Ilves said, the way to identify yourself needs to be centralized. Of course, you can do some federations on different principles, but centralization of security and digital identity is key. And definitely protecting the country critical infrastructure, the cybersecurity policies, those need to be centralized as well. And this is where I stop with the centralization, because everything else could be decentralized. Decentralization in a loosely coupled way drives the innovation. Centralization assumes the lowest common denominator, which is the obstacle. Decentralization drives the innovation, right? So from that perspective, my message here is each and every government needs to drive the innovation, right? Just like we had the Industrial Revolution 150 years ago, we are on the verge of events that have the ability to completely change the quality of lives, the quality we do business, and the job of the government employees. The job of the government is to create policies, the good policy agenda that will empower public-private partnerships, empower the innovation, to plug in with their solutions. And of course, use the global business capabilities, such as cloud computing today. So the first step in Estonia was X-Road. You know, that was implemented before interoperability in my company and other even became the concept. The second step was the digital identity. But X-Road, as this information bus, really gives the ability for decentralized e-governance in Estonia, because it's all based on commonly based industry standards, so the new solutions in the future can just plug in to this one, right? And I will finish with some of the innovative, highly innovative ideas of Estonia, like the concept of digital embassies in the cloud computing that will basically give the ability for Estonia to drive the country, to administer the country without a need of the territory, that drives the digital continuity no matter what happens in Estonia, and for that matter in any other country. And the second concept of Estonia Digital Citizen that basically gives me the ability to say, be a citizen of Brazil, resident of Croatia, but a digital citizen of Estonia, so I can do the business using the information technology under the laws of Estonia that are very favorable from the tax perspective. And these are all possible because the foundation is centralized, which is interop, digital identity, and cybersecurity, but everything else is decentralized. Thank you.
Thank you, Dejan. Let me tell you right away, you shocked me. I thought that Microsoft is going to go centralized. You were praising Estonia instead of Microsoft, so let me just return the honors and praise Microsoft because they have been a good sponsor to us. I'm very inspired that you are inspired of Estonian examples. Let's go now on with Artur. Artur Tunyan is freshly appointed director of EKENG, which is Armenian data sort of exchange agency or this information systems agency. He is right now grappling with this question. He has to put forward a policy for Armenia, and he is thinking about this in his everyday job, which way to go. Should he buy a big centralized system, or should he let the natural growth take place? So Artur, the floor is yours.
My name is Artur Tunyan, as you were mentioned, and my first computer was Pentium-based. So many thoughts that were presented today by President are very interesting for me, and I found some ideas. I would share your ideas on centralization and decentralization, and it was a surprise for me as well that Microsoft is pointing out some decentralization issues as well. So currently Armenia is facing, just on a crossroad, what kind of strategy we should develop or we should go forward. Yes, centralization has some advantages. It's a full control. It's a centralized, let's say, budget. It's everything under control, but there is a golden rule of management. You cannot manage efficiently more than 7 employees, and you cannot manage more than 7 agencies. So each agency is trying to do its own work. It has its own targets, and historically, Armenia developed several systems under e-governance. They are on, all of them have different levels of satisfaction, different levels of security, different platforms, and we are facing now how to join this, how to integrate it into one e-governance strategy. Thanks to e-governance Academy of Estonia, we're partnering with them and discussing these issues. Thanks to our donors from World Bank and EU. What is more important now that we're considering the right way to choose? If you go centralized, you get more, let's say, oriented in a management of your systems. But the benefits of that centralization, in our opinion, is getting better motivation from the agency, from the people who are thinking on everyday basis what the agency needs and what are the customers that citizens may need. I do believe that the most powerful guy, let's say, who is doing, let's say, management decisions on IT for e-governance cannot predict all the situations on agency level. And this is important to consider for any country. So our idea, let's say the basic and the most important idea is we should have centralized thinking, but decentralized management. Definitely, I agree with you that some critical issues like identity management, like PKI infrastructure, some other critical infrastructures should be centralized. For example, we are now considering, after having, let's say, PKI infrastructure, getting on upper level for mobile ID. Definitely, it's not possible to do without centralized approach. You should push this from the central government. However, you cannot do, let's say, very simple or very low-level management for specific agency. It's not a good approach, and we believe we would probably follow X-road option, which would give, for our country, small country like Armenia, is better management, better control, and the security issue that the president was talking about is one of the key elements for considering the centralized approach in e-governance management. Yes, if you have failed in one of the components, you keep others. If you have centralized, let's say, one cloud system, everything's there, and you are controlled, failure of the system means failing everything. So this is the main idea that we think about. I'm ready really to discuss and get your ideas as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So we have almost 2 votes already for the decentralization. I think we have to go with Mohammed Muradov now, because he has experience, well, studied in France. France is usually trying to centralize everything. And I believe your country, Azerbaijan, is also more for the centralized approach. How is it? What do you think? Why is it so? Or maybe it isn't so. I mean, please, the floor is yours.
First of all, I would like to talk about the context of e-government development in Azerbaijan. Azerbaijani government recently started to tackle petty corruption in the country, and I think that e-government development should be considered in this context. So the government started to open one-stop shop centers in Baku and in the region, and during 3 years, 3 million applications were proceeded in these centers. So the impact was good. But at the same time, the second tool to combat petty corruption, it was e-service development. And in this regard, and I think that there is a good environment where the government, civil society, and private sector can cooperate in this field. It's a good space, it's a new space, and I think that private sector of Azerbaijan can provide technical support to e-service development, as well as now the civil society involved these development. As a role, our civil society is to encourage public participation as well as to monitor e-services. And in this regard, we are given the methodology of e-governance academy, and on the basis of this methodology, we assist basic e-infrastructure components as well as the e-service development. So in about e-infrastructure components, during 3 years, I think that we achieved to establish major e-infrastructure components in Azerbaijan. For example, we have mobile ID, we have e-signature, we have e-payment tools, which is provided by private sector as well as by the states, and we have single sign-on function. We have unique portal where more than 40 public agencies are providing e-services. And in this regard, when we see e-services, we have not a unique picture, and we can understand on the assessment of these services how interoperability works in Azerbaijan, how centralization or decentralization is successful in Azerbaijan. So when we see that, when we assess the e-services, we choose live event services. And I think that it's a good indicator for each country how they develop their e-services to their citizens. For example, when in our case, registration is good for citizens. For example, when a baby is born, their information goes to population register, and also when the parents go to the Minister of Justice to have a birth certificate, the Minister of Justice already have information. So, and also it's always online. But when we come to, when the states, registration is good, it's online. But when state come to the provide social assistance, social benefits, we don't see the same situation, because the state does not provide social assistance to mother. The state does not provide any beneficial services to the parents. So it sees that when state and I would like to show the second case. The second case, when now in Azerbaijan, all labor contract is registered online. So the state knows how many people are in employment, how many people is employed. And it's this employment labor contract is interested for them, for the state, for business processes. But when it comes to give a social unemployment status to citizens, and as well as some social benefits to unemployment people, the e-service does not work well. So these cases shows us that our interoperability works only the services which is oriented to business sector, not to citizens. And I can see another case. For example, we can create online companies. We can provide tax declaration online. We can also pay all other penalties to online. But there is a problem. But the problem is that now we don't see procurement, e-procurement. We don't see a comprehensive approach to license delivering and other issues. So it shows that when states say that all the state agencies start to create e-services, they don't give any financial support, which is main problem. There are some ministers who are self-financing system. For example, Ministry of Tax, he has self-financing system from tax collection, and they could provide better services. But there are Ministry of Labor who has a poor financing system. They cannot provide better services. So one of the main problem of decentralization, yes, there is no clear budget policy in this case. But at the same time, the decentralization model gives state agencies to create their own expertise in IT. But when we are representing here civil society, we want to, our strategy is to push the government to improve the social-oriented services. We don't we have not any interest on businesses, but we want to push the government to improve public services toward citizens. Because I think that in this area we can use decentralized approach because it works in Azerbaijan. We have one-stop shop centers, Asan centers, who provide of many services of 9 public agencies in one public hall. So this approach could be applied to e-government toward delivering services toward citizens. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I think you raised a couple of very interesting questions. I mean, one that the president addressed with a corruption question. I mean, it would be interesting to think whether centralization with IT would actually make it easier. Well, you can't bribe the computer, but you have to bribe just fewer officials maybe. Well, let's think about it. What about the other thing, the local government? I mean, you are talking about central government service provision, but we'll come to that, back to that. First, let's go to Georgia. And we have here, and now a little bit more of this kind of international experience. David Stonehill is from the USID. He has worked in Africa, he has worked in Caucasus, he has quite a wide picture from different parts of the world. So what works, what doesn't? I mean, should it be centralized or should it be decentralized? Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ivar, and thank you to the conference organizers for giving me an opportunity to serve on this panel. As Ivar mentioned, my name is David Stonehill. I work for the U.S. Agency for International Development. I'm the Deputy Director of the Office of Democracy and Governance in Tbilisi, Georgia, and I manage a portfolio of good governance foreign assistance programs, including a number of e-governance initiatives. So just to give you a sample of some of the things that we're partnering with the government of Georgia on right now, we're working to develop improved business intelligence software for Georgia's donor coordination unit to improve their reporting. We're working on a new module of Georgia's health management information system that gives citizens direct access to health information. We're working on new modules for Georgia's e-treasury system that will link the Ministry of Finance with local governments. Improvements to data.gov.ge, which is Georgia's open data portal. And also we're working to improve Parliament's website, the State Audit Office's website, so that citizens have easy to understand information about their state budget and about audit findings. So if you take a step back and look at all this stuff we're working on, I think it becomes apparent that from a donor perspective, e-governance is inseparable from good governance. And I would argue that the term is becoming increasingly irrelevant, that you really can't separate it from this larger theme of good governance, just like you can't separate e-commerce from commerce, or you can't separate e-learning from learning anymore. The initiative that I wanted to talk a little bit about today, the one that I'm most excited about, is an e-participation website that we're working with the government of Georgia to develop. Currently, it's called iChange, so I'll refer to it as iChange today, although when it launches, it could go by a different name. And I will come back to this topic of centralization versus decentralization. So just bear with me. So some historical context about how iChange came to be. So as many of you know, Georgia is famous around the world for some of the top-down reforms that were executed following the Rose Revolution in 2004, such as overhauling the police force, improving transportation infrastructure, shooting to the top of the World Bank's Doing Business Index. And I think many people would agree that these reforms were very appropriate for that time in Georgia's history. And I think some of those same people would also argue that they were done in a non-consultative, very top-down sort of way. And so what this government is trying to do is it's trying to find new, innovative ways to engage citizens in the policy-making process, to gather citizen input, not just at traditional town hall meetings, but through the web, which is the biggest town hall in existence. So the Georgian Prime Minister, the Prime Minister's office, teamed up with a Georgian civil society organization, the Institute for Development of Freedom of Information, and they came to us and they said, we want to develop this e-participation platform. And it'll have three components. One is e-petitions. One is an opportunity for government officials to solicit input on policy documents. And one is a sort of an opportunity for citizens to start bottom-up conversations about governance. So we decided, okay, let's start with the e-petitions module. Let's get that working, get people to use it, and then focus on the other modules. We looked at a number of different models around the world for e-petitions, including the US and Estonia. Estonia, I'd say, has a very liberal approach where I don't believe there's a signature threshold for Today I Decide, which is now part of the eSale.ee initiative. The US has the highest threshold. It's 100,000 signatures in 30 days in order to get a response from the White House. In Germany and the UK, the e-petitions will sometimes be routed straight to Parliament, whereas in the US, it's relegated to the executive branch. So there's all these different models, and we were working with the government of Georgia to cobble together an approach that's appropriate for their unique circumstances. And in the end, after lots of deliberation and consultations, it was decided that iChange would be an executive branch initiative with a signature threshold of 5,000 within a 30-day period. And I don't want to speak for the government of Georgia, but the system, the iChange system, should be launched sometime later this year. So back to this question of centralization versus decentralization, you can look at this a few different ways in the context of what we're doing with e-petitions. One of the questions that we had to consider was, should the system be designed in a way so that petitions can be routed to mayors? And what we decided was no, that would not be appropriate at this time. And you have to understand Georgia's political setup, I think, to understand the decision. Georgia's operating under a new constitution that only goes back to January of 2014, where now the prime minister the prime minister now leads the government as opposed to the president. So we saw this as an opportunity to boost the institution of the prime minister as a policy coordination body, as a body that could take steps to meaningfully engage with citizens, solicit input, and to start to exercise their constitutional mandate. Also, Georgia is a small country where democratic institutions are still nascent, they're still evolving, and municipalities have a limited set of competencies that mostly relate to things like local roads and waste management and kindergartens. So we didn't want to be in a situation where citizens are asking their local officials to solve problems that they don't have the tools to solve. So the last thing that I want to propose, and His Excellency the President of Estonia said something along these lines as well, is that even with a centralized e-governance initiative, you have to take a very decentralized approach to getting people to use it. And this is particularly true in a country like Georgia, where internet penetration is only 50%, and the regions and the capital may as well be on different planets. Pata from the Data Exchange Agency pointed to this challenge in his remarks yesterday. So there's this quote from the famous American movie Field of Dreams by Kevin Costner: "If you build it, they will come." And that's not necessarily always true with an e-governance initiative. And I would argue that the government of Georgia has some amazing programmers, coders within the government that have the ability to design these things, but they do struggle with getting people to use them and getting the word out. And so in recognition of that challenge, we are partnering with the government and a host of organizations, international organizations, domestic organizations, media outlets, PR firms, local grassroots community groups, and collectively we're going to design an innovative public awareness and public engagement campaign that will get people not just aware but excited to use this new system and to petition their government, even in ethnic minority communities and in rural villages. So if anyone's interested in partnering with us, please come talk to me after this panel. So I'll stop there. So
thank you very much. Very interesting, and I think you raised also quite valid points. You know, people come. When you build, they come, but they leave when they don't get feedback. Mm-hmm. And when you have a centralized system in e-participation, can you imagine how much feedback you have to give? You have to have a specialized institution for that. And then even people are still not happy. I mean, what you described, what you want to do with Georgia, it's something that quite recently the Indian Prime Minister launched, the MyGov is Indian, this kind of participation portal. Really great thing, I think quite innovatively used also, all kind of crowdsourcing initiatives also there. And what the people were complaining constantly is, well, but I wrote such a nice idea, I didn't get any feedback. Mm-hmm. And I was like thinking, well, okay, you have billion people writing in, so how many people should give the feedback? But anyway, very interesting questions. We have one more speaker in the panel to kind of wrap it up, and then we'll go wide and into the different subjects. Now we have Joaquin Ajemian. He is representing the European Commission. He has worked also in different parts of the world, but not only as a civil servant, he has also worked in private sector. So I think his experience is kind of all-encompassing. So maybe not that much in e-governance per se, but having the ideas of centralized, decentralized, you probably have struggled this kind of throughout your life. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ivar, and thank you to have invited me to that panel. The truth is that I came here to Tallinn to hear that panel, so I was happily surprised to be invited. But it's very. I hope for you it will be interesting, and anyway, the process for me is interesting. So I'm currently working at the European delegation in Armenia. I'm head of cooperation, and just to frame you. What we're doing, we're spending something like 50 million euro grant per year to support Armenia's strategies. The question we are facing today, we had it, and I had it with different person in the Armenian government. And you know, government is diverse, there's different point of view. Archer on the right has a clear vision, much clearer than me, than what should be the way forward and what means decentralized. But I didn't know anything about centralized, decentralized before. Let's say 6 months, but I could sense in the government different approach. Ministry of Finance wanted a control. A Prime Minister office had wanted an approach, Estonian approach, and us, the donor, we were coming with 10 million euro in a sector where we felt like, with 1 million euro, thanks to Ivar and eGov Academy, we've done tremendous work in Armenia, and we thought like, let's continue and put another 10 million euro, and maybe down the line put another 15 million euro. But the question is how, where, who to talk to, what is the strategy? And now, as you know, strategies are always diverse and there is always different people with different approach. Do we talk to the Ministry of Finance? Do we talk to the Ministry of Economy? Do we talk to the Prime Minister's office? Do I talk to Archer? Depending to whom I talk, I have different answers. But maybe before answering to the question, Bonvo, I don't want to answer the question. You have to see the filter through which we take decision in the European Union. We have different principles, and this is shared with all the donors. First, we have to concentrate our support on certain sectors. Then we're seeking the ownership of the government. And third, we're looking for sustainability. And through these principles, you can see how we can shape and influence, sometimes in good direction, sometimes in bad direction, policies such as the decision on should we go centralized and decentralized. Concentration. Most of the donor activities are in specific sectors. So we don't often have the opportunity to say, let's put in place an X-road system. For example, I negotiate, I lobby my management to have an envelope of 10 million euro in eGov, but this envelope is still targeted to custom. However, I do have the feeling we can use this targeted approach to have a broad approach. When I talked to the Ministry of Finance, they told us the financing agreement says we should work on custom. That has to be the centralized approach. That has to be, maybe better understood, the STAR system. Ministry of Finance in the center, controlling everything. You give us the money, through the budget, we control everything. That's the talk we hear from the Ministry of Finance. When then I talk to the ECANC, head of ECANC, this is not the approach. They wanted X-road approach. So we are thinking, we have this concentration process that says it's custom, but we want to do something that is broader, that is a systemic approach. So we still have to find a way, and we will move to the second principle of a donor, ownership. The dream of a donor is to say, tell me what you want, I give you the money. But usually it's a little bit more complex. But tell me who? Prime Minister? Who? Minister? Chief of Staff? Which? And in their strategies, you always have a general strategy, a sectoral strategy, and different contradicting strategy, action plan. Even us, we have so many action plans in Armenia. So which one to take? And as a donor, you do have not the control, but the policy, the possibility to enter into what we call a policy dialogue, which is we can influence the government and say, if I give you 10 million euro, Mr. Prime Minister, I believe centralized approach or decentralized approach is the most efficient. And when the government is not strong enough to tell to the donor, no, centralized is not what we want, they could say, give me the 10 million euro and I go that way. This is very dangerous. We don't have this issue in Armenia, but I had the issue in West Africa, in Benin in particular, where I worked before. So ownership is key, but ownership means a fight, a plurality of strategies, and there the donor has to have an opinion. So the third criteria to read the question is sustainability. Because when we do a project, we want it to continue. We don't want to do a just little charity project one after the other. We want to bring the change, the reform that continue and that sustain. And I would say we're talking about two models, centralized, decentralized. We could call them STAR system, X-road system, but I would say the most common I've seen before was the silo approach. Everyone does one thing that don't communicate with another one. This really pleases the donor. You're working in health, you do the health system, and you're really happy. No interconnectability. If you do migration, you're really happy because the money is tagged migration, the money is tagged healthcare, the money is tagged election. Just to give you a very interesting example, and I think there is food for thought in this. In West Africa, in Benin, for example, where I worked, we had a 30 million euro election project where we had to make sure to defend democracy that people were registered and could go and vote. Every 5 years, we had this same project, 30 million every 5 years, 30 million every 5 years. But we don't have any civil registry. And the thing is that because the donor that support, and in Benin much more than in Armenia, don't have this systematic approach, because it's not a strategic approach, then we neither centralize, neither decentralize, but we a silo approach without sustainability. So to answer to the question, I would say us, if we ask our opinion, we will tell the Armenian government, out of the 10 million euro, we want to ensure sustainability. Tell me how you want to do sustainability. We want to ensure that the project mutually benefit each other, and our project on migration benefit the project on health, and there is this interconnectivity, whether through a centralized approach, whether through a decentralized approach. And then we want to ask the question, do you really think you have the capacity And is it possible to have the capacity to manage a centralized approach? Singapore did it, but Singapore is special. Are we in Singapore here? Is Armenia closer to Estonia than to Singapore? Both geographically and historically, I think the answer is clear. Third, as working for the EU, I think we have to not look for the best solution. We have to pick a solution that has a track record. What is important? Do you have a track record? There is a clear track record in transition countries that join the EU, as it could be the case in Eastern Partnership countries that want to get closer. This is clear. Track record means we go for that. If Singapore did develop something, maybe it's for the Asian tigers. Let's use the one that is working close to here. And I would say the last is that as EU, we should promote our member state. Estonia has this proven track record, best practices in EU, and as an EU delegation, not only in Armenia, but then I'll continue popping from one country to another, I do believe Estonia can bring this change, and we should use every single of our member states in the diversity they have and what they can bring in cooperation. So, not to answer to the question, I would say, please choose something that brings progress. Doesn't matter if it's the best or not, you will progress in a sustained way that you can implement, not the dream that you cannot get. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See, you earned an applause. It was a very good insight to the donor's mind. I mean, usually they give us a little bit of money but never speak out. But thank you very much for speaking out. Now we know how to maybe get closer to the money. But really, I think we got quite a lot of ideas. I mean, I actually hope to hear more about the centralization or this kind of positive things, because actually Singapore has done a very good job, but Singapore is not alone. In e-governance, Austria has also quite a centralized approach. It's just what is distinguishing them, where it can be applied. I mean, if you have a very good civil service system, you can do it because the civil servants are above the sort of petty fights of politicians, which always happen. If you have a very strong centralized government with vertical sort of authority lines, I think it is possible to do it, and it is, at least if the decisions happen to be correct, it is actually much more efficient. So there is nothing inherently wrong with centralized approach. I think actually also the numbers themselves, or the digitization, formalization, invites for more centralization. Because it's kind of easier, you know, you put the ones and zeros together. Well, our perspective for promoting this kind of more decentralized approach is exactly because we have to take account the human factor. In our countries, the civil servants are still imperfect. I mean, we still have these human factors that we need to be counting when using the systems that Microsoft produces. So that is how you get more flexibility. But I fully take the point that Dejan started with, saying that there are critical number of elements that have to be centralized in order to be successful. Absolutely. It is not, the Estonian system is not decentralized as well, in a sense that we have many elements that are very much centralized. So, I don't know, do you have questions, or should we discuss these moments? So we still have, 35 minutes, so it is quite a bit for, how do we have the mic management? Any mics running around if somebody wants to ask something? Don't see, there are some people who would like to speak, so should I give my mic?
Morning, ladies and gentlemen. I just have a question on centralized and decentralized. With the decentralization system, you can decentralized inefficiency, lack of skills on the lower level. On a decentralized system, you tend to pull everything back to one decision maker, owner, or whatever. Now, in e-governance, how would this thing work? Would it be better to start from a decentralized system, develop the human resource, develop the capacity, develop the sustainability over time, and then let go on some of the service deliveries through e-governance model? Thank you.
Thank you very much for the. Thank you very much for the question. I just want to reinforce the message here that there isn't a silver bullet answer for this, right? One size does not fit all. And probably the hybrid approach is the way to go. The percentage of centralized versus decentralized will tightly be integrated with the localities of the specific environment, of the size of the country, of the type of the government that you currently have and that is leading the transformation to the digital age, right? Like, and to your point, when it comes to the adoption of e-government, I always say, start small. Don't go big, because you will spend a lot of money, it will be a big project, and then you will struggle with the usability issue. If you really focus on 1, 2, or 3 small things that will improve the lives of the citizens, or that would improve the business environment of your country to cut the red tape, so not a big project, but a small one, in order to really shine with the success story. That's basically an additional advocacy for decentralized approach. But if you proceed with that approach, you will end up with the chaos, because no interoperability, no integration, everybody does small projects that are successful, but successful in a silos. And that is where you do need centralized approach in order to come up with that information bus that Estonia calls X-Road, we in Microsoft call it e-government gateway, right? In order to kind of gather different approaches. So the answer is, and I'm really advocating, it's not black and white. There's a portion for centralized approach, there's a portion for decentralized, and I cannot give the answer now what the percentage is, because that's the subject of the debate that we need to do with the governments in your country. Thanks.
I think that is very much correct. Thank you very much. I mean, as a debate, or this what you pointed out on the problems of decentralization becoming really expensive. It's always a question also. When we started in Estonia with X-Road, the myth goes, I mean, because it was already more than 15 years ago, I don't know if Arvo is here, who was the executive director of Governance Academy now. He used to be the CIO of Estonian government, and they did an exercise in Estonian government asking the CIOs of different ministries okay, you've all developed your systems, you want to integrate them with others, so why don't you just chart out your plans? And everybody charted out their plans, and then somebody wrote the numbers to this, and then it turned out that it was 30 times the expenditure that Estonia is spending on IT annually. So it was no way that it could have been happened in decentralized way. What we did, we kept the decentralized governance system, but we created this centralized data exchange under it. Or I mean, it's still not centralized because it's the data goes directly from one to another place. But nevertheless, I mean, there are these centralized elements, and it was created centrally. So, I mean, decentralization is not total, because if you totally go decentralized, you can reach a chaos. But it's why we raise this question here partly is that these countries of Eastern Partnership, but even moreover when we move to the East, they think that the answer to the e-government is you just create this kind of thing that is e-government, where all the data is collected, all the services are provided, and then we see that they fail one after another. It doesn't matter how much money is put in, because the data exchange itself is so rich, so we can't really have this centralized. Now, there were other questions. Yes, the mic is there.
Good afternoon. My name is Dusan Stojanovic. I'm the representative of Serbian government. I'm working as a director of Directorate for E-Government. Thank you for this great panel. And my question will be, first of all, I want to comment that we have to be sure, all of us, that we have to use some mixed model. It can be fully decentralized or centralized model. I think that you are all agree with this. But my question is, as somebody who is working in government, we have a problem with solutions if they are not technology free. So particularly this question goes to Dan and to Mr. David, because they are very close to the business side. If we create the centralized model, do you think that it is the better solution for for us who are working in the government? Because then we are not so stick to some technology, and business will feel better in this whole system. Thank you.
Actually, David, do you want to comment first? Or?
I think you're a little closer to the business side than I am, so
Well,
why don't you go first?
I'm actually very close to the country because I come from Serbia as well. Dusan, thanks very much for the question. I have to say, I don't particularly think that building the centralized system would make the work of the government closer to the business, to the private sector, or vice versa. I always advocate for the futures of the public-private partnerships. And you know, I was actually advocating for that in Serbia, not only in Serbia, in all of the Balkan countries as well. As I say, actually, as you suggested, the mixture of centralized and decentralized system will definitely make it more attractive to the private sector. And by private sector, given the fact that we're speaking about Serbia, which is a small country, but there's also other small countries other than Estonia that already figured it out. I do believe that with a more decentralized approach, you also give the opportunity to say, I am the government and I govern. You, private sector, meaning IT companies, big companies like Google, Microsoft, Amazon, or big local companies like Serbian Telecom, you know IT and you run my systems. So at this point, I would also like to advocate a bit towards this decentralization, because it gives you as the government the opportunity to focus on your job, which is the implementation in the business rules of the e-governance solutions that are actually outsourced to somebody else, hopefully to the cloud. Right? And I'm advocating for the cloud because cloud gives us the opportunity to focus on our job. If I'm in the government, I focus on that. Cloud provider focuses on the operational efficiency, effectiveness, and everything else that goes with the e-governance. Because no matter how much I love IT and e-government and e-governance is just the tool that implements the ideas of the people, both on the side of government officials and civil servants. So, thanks.
Anyone else?
I would just add that, you know, it depends on the political and historical factors in any given country. In Georgia, and just going back to e-petitions, because this is what I'm working on right now, you know, we decided to take a very centralized approach, given the limited competencies once you go down to the more localized units of government. In the United States, we are highly decentralized. Things like education go all the way down to the district level. So a centralized approach to e-governance in the United States would never really work. When I worked in Afghanistan, I was actually pushing for standardization of a financial management software package that we had helped develop. And after a few months, I realized it just wasn't feasible given the historical context in Afghanistan and very localized power structures. So but I would think Serbia, given it's a small country, erring towards centralization would make sense at the start.
I think maybe I don't understand fully the topic, but I would say Ivar was my professor in taking coffees on a regular basis in Armenia concerning this topic. And we could change the name, centralized, decentralized, because we're all aiming having a decentralized working society. Let's forget. There's a star system, and there's something that allow exchange and little servers everywhere. That looks, and for sure to allow exchange, you need some rules. This is a dictionary, like who has what data and how do I exchange the data. One of the danger, and I see the donor community having this danger, is that we have money that comes because it's a political decision, and it says on the table, 20 million euro, find me something in that sector. Then we want to do a tender, and we say, easiest is turnkey project, and we launch a tender. Different pressure we'll get from different people, because what means tender means like these people lobbying to get a contract, pushing for terms of reference, and then they influence at different level. And if we don't have a visibility, we can get into the end of a software package or service provider. And I would say eGov is not IT, and we had the discussion yesterday in the Eastern Partnership panel. It's only 20% of the iceberg. It's a modality to exchange data and to know who owns what, where, what are the rules, what are the procedures. There's all this sharing that has nothing to do with server. It's just to do like, how do I make sure that the data is asked only one time and saved at the right place is exchanged? And then there's a modality, which is the way we do it through the tool. This is an IT tool. But I would say eGov, if my understanding is correct, is not driven by technology, but is driven by an approach to optimize the result. And the danger I can see, and I feel it everywhere, and I could feel it in Armenia also because of maybe some ministers managing big companies in the IT sectors, is that we would have a driven decision linked to not what is the best system, but what links to maybe a project for a company that is close to whatever person in the government, meaning that all our process anyway are transparent, so there's no issue on this. But having a tender when we have a service provider is different than having an approach to build and think about how does we put an exchange of information and then provide the IT services.
Thank you. Before I give the word to you or whoever wants, I just wanted to remind you, I mean, something Dejan said, Estonia has figured it out. I don't think so. I mean, actually, it is a question of decentralized, centralized can be looked through this prism. If we centralize too much, I think we are falling into danger, closing sort of creative decision-making procedures. Or, I mean, we'll just decide on something and then it goes that way. And I remember in 1997 when I was writing Estonian information policy, it was exactly one of the reasons, I mean, there wasn't really much to learn from the world yet. So what I said, well, let's leave the door open to different decisions. Let's not give the government this kind of final say that this is the only right approach. The more you have this kind of flexibility, the more you can be sure that your government, your organization, at some point will, and sooner rather than later, will take a corrective action. Because these new things appear seemingly out of nowhere. I mean, at some point of time, they seem to be not really, let's say a pad like that was ready much before the iPad came out. But it was the iPads that took over this kind of wildfire. Now businesses think, education thinks how to integrate it.
Yeah.
So things happen, you can't see it for 20 years ahead like Malaysia wanted to do back in 1990s. They had a strategy, government strategy for 2020. Were very laudable for 20 years, but you can't just think ahead for 20 years if the world is changing in 5 years. So, I mean, I think that is a basic line. We need to leave this kind of flexibility, whatever the system is. And then we have to drive to the efficiency.
Yeah, may I comment? Sure. So I definitely agree that actually we cannot afford to leave some flexibility. We have to leave for a lot of flexibility because we never know what's going to happen a couple of years down the road, but we don't want to reinvent the wheel a couple of years down the road because we made some strategic architectural mistakes today, right? So today we need to build a framework that is going to be capable to consume the changes of the future, although we don't know what those changes are going to be. And I'll go back to David's comment on the routing of the petitions in iChange, right? You said there was a question, should we architect the way to allow the routing to go to the mayor, right? If I may make a suggestion here, we should allow for the routing to be implemented based on the business rules that we don't know today, but will be implemented in the future. So our framework, our architecture, the baseline for e-governance should be completely dynamic. No hard coding, no hard decisions made based on the current policy or political environment in the particular country. We should be able to change things on a fly using software, right? And again, this is why, again, I'm the IT person, and I'm advocating for the cloud environment. Cloud environment is the environment where we don't care where the software is, where the hardware is, where the energy is. We care about the business rules. And as we implement the business rules and the framework in that soft way, right, then our systems will be completely I would say, flexible and dynamic. And if I want to advocate for one single centralized manner, that's this centralized idea to make sure we invest a bit more time, but we build the systems in this kind of flexible way, right? And just one more sentence here. Since we have the donors here, and I have a huge appreciation for both USAID and for EU, and as well as the World Bank and the others. Some tremendous work had been done in Europe and in the world using the money from the donors, right? But on the other hand, a couple of years ago, President Ilves was chairing the European Cloud Partnership. So European Union came up with this great document called Unleashing the Potential of Cloud Computing in Europe. The most important development vehicle in Europe is European Union structural funds. And there's funds also from USAID. Those funds are focused only on the projects or I would say with the component that is a capital expenditure component, CAPEX. Those funds are not focused on OPEX at all. Cloud computing is all about OPEX. So I'm asking the donors to consider changing their policies because they will enable both centralized and decentralized e-governance development if they allow for the funds to be used as OPEX as well, so for the services.
Okay. So there are more questions. There is a mic already. Someone, so please.
As a Dane in Estonia, I just wanted to add a little bit of an aspect here. Because in terms of the governance aspect of the IT solutions, you need a form of centralization. I mean, Dejan pointed it out. Certain key enablers like identity management, interoperability needs to be in place. Because if we allow 98 Danish municipalities to do this, some of them will do a great job, the majority will not know what to do, and the rest will run different directions and scream for someone to take responsibility. So there we obviously need to centralize it at some stage. In federal countries, you can do that at state or regional level, or you can move it up or down. It depends on your context. But there is a need for centralizing certain things. This includes sort of an e-government or e-governance corporation structure, because the key here is to ensure coordination. So all those systems are owned differently. Then data is not stored multiple places. We don't have the traditional stovepipes where Ministry X doesn't allow the municipalities to access the information unless they pay for it and this and the other. And that needs to come from somewhere. It needs to be driven from somewhere. In Denmark, it's a financial agenda at the moment, so it's an agency in the Ministry of Finance. In other countries, it's the Ministry of Interior. It doesn't really matter, but there's an agreement on who sits at the end of the table to coordinate the agreements between the different actors. Because otherwise you end up with other aspects in terms of outcome, which is that you have a fragmented approach where you log on to a municipality website and you need to use 5 different logins for 5 different services because no one has thought about the usability and the user-friendliness in services. Yeah? The great municipalities will do it, but the majority will not be. Yeah? So remove the E and look at setting the ground rules and the framework and coordinate that. So coordination and agreement on what direction we're going in is essential. Otherwise, we'll not end up with open standards. We'll not end up with interoperable data because we will have different definition of addresses and year of birth. So these are some of the traditional issues that needs to be addressed centrally. And then we can have decentralized responsibility for maintaining systems, delivering services, and so forth.
Yes, there was...
Hello. I have a question. My name is Maxim Kisikov. I'm from Kyrgyzstan, and I was hoping somebody would cover this topic today. I work for a contractor who works for e-government, and one of the problems that I face is that I'm strongly for the decentralized system, but the problem is that somebody has to coordinate it, and this has to be a government-owned body. And I would like panelists to elaborate a little bit more on to which extent this centralized body should govern the development of the IT system within the agencies, within the governmental agencies. Should they dictate any standards? Should they dictate any standards on documentation, on protocols, on implementations? This is what I would like to know. Thank you very much.
Hello, I'm Swiss advisor to Ukraine from Switzerland. And my question is actually connecting the 2 past questions. It's on the policy dialogue instruments. You know, the human dimension and how do you make it happen? We talked a lot about the getting the recipe right, you know, the decentralized versus centralized, and it's very country specific. I'm just wondering from your different country perspectives, what policy dialogue instruments did you use and any best practices that could be shared with other countries to get the recipe right or try to get there? Thank you.
Okay, I wouldn't consider our dialogue over centralization and decentralization as black and white scenarios. Definitely, it is country specific. And definitely, you should consider society psychology. For example, we talk about Singapore. I visited Singapore several times and learned their experience. So what's the difference between, let's say, 3 Singaporeans and 3 Armenians? So if you would, let's say, ask opinion of these 3 Singaporeans, you would get 1 opinion. If you ask 3 Armenians, you will get 5 opinions. So this is the main difference, right? This psychology and society issue. I totally agree with you that we shouldn't, let's say, consider it as black and white. Yes, there should be a coordination, and after several years of, let's say, our experience, we came to the decision that it should be coordinated. Up to now, in Armenia, we have no specific agency, specific ministry who is responsible for, let's say, IT development. We came to the idea that, yes, we need some kind of CIO office, we need some kind of, let's say, hierarchy, but it doesn't mean we're gonna centralize everything in one hand, and we don't trying to centralize all the financing, all the budgeting, make all the procurements, direct everybody how they should work. No. The issue of coordination, even with donor funding, yes, the donors get lost sometimes. They cannot understand with whom they should work. And this is a constant issue for several years. Depending how, let's say, one of the ministers approach to the donor, they may have decisions based on, let's say, personality or some kind of influence. But this is not the right way. And I agree with some of you who mentioned that there should be centralized decision-making for specific areas. Yes, identity management, you cannot do anything without centralized identity management. You cannot do anything if you have no centralized interoperability. You may have different systems working, but not interoperable with each other. So this is a main idea. Don't consider this as a black and white. There should be a coordination, but the coordination should be limited only, as you mentioned, providing standards, providing, let's say, rules for playing the game. Not just the directing, like, I want to buy this and I don't ask your opinion. This is my, let's say.
Thank you. I think, David, Georgia has a very good this kind of donor coordination experience. You probably have it. And do you also kind of, as donors, somehow, I don't know, look around into the policy dialogue with the wider public? How does it work?
Yeah, I mean, I think policy dialogue is the key term here. And this is exactly why USAID is so interested in developing and supporting an e-petitions platform in Georgia. And we have to remember that we're not supporting this because we want to see a particular policy outcome or we're hoping that this will advance some sort of law. It's the process itself that we're investing in. And there were some moments where the government of Georgia, you know, they kept looking at this as a liability, as something that may sort of back them up into a corner and force them into making a tough decision. One of the examples was, what if there's a petition to legalize marijuana? This is not an issue we even want to touch. And we said, it's okay. This is just a way to open up a dialogue, to create a two-way street, two-way avenue of communication between the citizenry and the government, which is incredibly important, and it's a novel idea in the post-Soviet space. In fact, in the United States, I think our system, our e-petition system is We the People, and it's been quite successful in that there are, I think, over 7 million people have registered with the system. But I think, you know, there was an expectation that, oh, this is going to shape the policy debate on issues like foreign policy and, you know, the budget deficit and things like this. And actually, the policy issues that have been affected as a result of this dialogue One is getting legislation passed to unlock cell phones so that consumers can buy a cell phone from one telecom company and then use it with another. It's kind of a niche issue, but nonetheless, We the People was a catalyst to pass some pro-consumer legislation. Another issue that's come to the forefront is puppy mills, which are these places where they sort of mass-produce dogs. Very strange, bizarre issue, but nonetheless, it sort of unexpectedly came to the forefront. And there's even been joke petitions. You know, the government has been requested to build a Death Star, like in Star Wars, and they actually had to provide a formal response, and they used it as an opportunity to justify continued investment in in aerospace technologies through NASA. So again, it's about the dialogue. It's not about the outcome.
Okay, thanks. It seems my microphone has gone walking. Is there anybody who desperately wants to talk to this? Yes, there is somebody. And then we'll go for the final round of statements from the panelists. Yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Jón Þór Hallsson. I'm from Iceland. And I have a question. We discuss here central and decentral for e-governance. Let's look at the governments themselves. In some countries, we have very centralized governments. In other countries, we have decentralized. Is there a relationship between the type of government and the type of governance which we should look at? We agree that the government is an important stakeholder in this process, and I have the feeling that a centralized government would be more at ease with centralized e-governance than decentralized. I would like if you could comment on this question.
Okay, so since we are about 5 minutes to the coffee break, why don't, this was a very nice statement. Everybody comments like a final say to the panel, please.
It's a great question, and I would like to actually ask all of us to try to do our best to decouple the government, the current government, from the governance. The current governments are there to stay 4 years, maybe more, another term, maybe less if they fall. But in any given point of time, we are here to build the e-governance framework that is supposed to serve the citizens, businesses, and government employees today, but also in the future. So again, my final message would be to make sure that we build it in a very flexible way, which assumes the hybrid approach, right? And again, to ask the donors to consider these funds for OPEX projects, since those are going to be the cornerstones of e-governance in the future. Thank you.
So I would like to add some my points about the coordination. I think that the coordination is needed more within the agencies of the government. And because in our case, the situation is not chaotic, but there is two agencies who are responsible for the development of e-government. The first one who is responsible to monitor e-services, and the second one, the Ministry of Communication and e-government operator who support the state agency to develop their e-services. But I observed that there is problem when the ministry communicate with other agency to push them to come to e-government portal. Somehow there are some ministers who resist. But in this case, I think that political support is very important. Maybe policy advisor of e-government is needed within the president administration to follow this process constantly and to provide support, political support for integration of state agencies to the e-government portal. And the last two positive things about decentralization. The first one, so in our case, the cabinet of minister ordered to agencies to provide e-services, and in the order all the e-service is listed, and on the basis of this order the agency started to provide e-services. And somehow it's good because it creates competition between state agencies, and as a civil society we are observed, we say that this is bad guy, this is good guy, and it somehow creates a good competition between state agencies to provide e-services. And the last one, it's about the nature of decentralization. Decentralization has an organic nature, and now our e-government expands from state agencies to private sector, to banking sector, as well as to the local executive bodies. So, and at the same time, there are some services which is not planned in the list of decree of Minister of Cabinet, but and in this process, the private and state agencies create new services to the people, which is not planned before. It is also good positive of decentralization.
Okay, Robin.
Thank you, Ivan. My understanding of the question today, and building on the last question, whether a centralized or decentralized e-gov approach is what is the best option? Is there a link between a centralized and decentralized government? I think there is no link. And I would say maybe the words are misleading. We could say the centralized economy, there's open capitalistic economy, has nothing to do with the organization of a government. So there's a model that is managed and where often the Ministry of Finance wants to take the lead, and there are models where all ministries in their own prerogative interact with each other under the control, depending in the structure of each government, by the Prime Minister office. So that's for me, it's clear that there is no link between centralized, decentralized in governance, meaning that there's a central power, there's a municipality, there's a region, and what we've been talking about today. To use this last intervention and build on my colleague on the left from Microsoft, and do we finance OPEX? Yes, we do finance OPEX in non-EU countries, but what is key for us is sustainability. Does what we put in place will sustain itself? If it's to pay for a system for 3 years, knowing that the government doesn't have the capacity to sustain it, we don't do it. So we only invest in things that are sustainable. So to conclude, I do believe that the way forward is a way that has a track record like Estonia, that has a track record in very short time, that a lot of countries can frog leap as Estonia did, and we are willing to, us EU in Armenia, support that if the governments confirm that this decentralized or open approach is the one you want. Thank you.
So Arthur, are you ready to confirm already, or we'll take some
actually
time?
it's confirmed. So my opinion that it really doesn't matter how the government is formed, whether it's so centralized or not, because I wouldn't consider the main beneficiary of e-governance as a government. It's a society. Citizens are the main beneficiaries, and you shouldn't consider the government agencies as your beneficiaries for e-governance. From this perspective, again, it really depends on the country specifics. There is no clear recipe whether you should use centralized for centralized government or vice versa. Just consider in your approaches that your main beneficiary is your citizen. In that case, you would find the best solutions. Of course, you should consider more on your cost effectiveness. Yes, it seems attractive applying, let's say, cloud system for the government, but how you would have it working on a sustainable basis. Whether you have capacities in a country to finance this or not after 2 or 3 years, let's say, implementation. So these are the main issues for countries, especially with limited budgets. You should be in an agile management system. You should make decisions as they come out. So therefore, yes, flexible thinking with flexible technologies should be your priority. We are not going to buy, let's say, the luxury car. And we should consider that we need a car that would go through, let's say, go to the future in a safe way. This is the main idea.
Thank you. David, one sentence to you and one sentence to me, and then we'll finish and they can go for a coffee. So
Okay.
please.
I would just emphasize this idea that even centralized e-governance initiatives, you need to take a very decentralized approach to getting people to actually use these systems. And I think Estonia has tremendous experience with this. As President Ilves mentioned, Estonia developed its IT sector even before it was a highly developed country, and so there's a lot of sensitization and basic training that had to take place. So as we roll out this e-petition initiative in Georgia, we'd like to learn more from the e-governance academy, and recognizing that you guys are real leaders in this space. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And from me, I promise just one sentence. Well, actually, I now say 2. But, well, first, about centralization or decentralization, I don't think it really matters at the end. I think Arthur put it rightly, and I am very much surprised hearing this from the official, the government official. It is actually about the human face. It is not about the IT. The government has to retain the human face as much as possible. And we are, in this digitization era, we are kind of running into the trouble of, well, or threat of losing it. And well, this centralization, decentralization debate has been in Estonia for a long time, and we learned hopefully something today. But look, there are so many other topics, and Estonia is still growing, and we are still debating on new things. So let's go and continue to debate today and to debate tomorrow, and then next coming years. So, but now just a coffee, I understand. Thank you very much. So we'll thank applause.
Thank you.